Okay, good afternoon, everybody. And just for a moment before we start, we've just passed 150,000 deaths from coronavirus, so I thought we'd just have a moment of silence thinking of those we lost and their families and friends. Thank you. Now, I'm joined by Senators Wyden, Stabenow, and Brown. Americans today are on the precipice of, and in some cases have already gone over, several cliffs for one reason alone. The White House and Senate Republicans could not get their act together, wasting precious time. They still don't have their act together. In my many years in serving in this chamber, I have never seen a majority of any type, this Republican majority, respond to a national emergency in such a disorganized and disoriented fashion. It's hurting Americans. It's not like they didn't know the deadlines were coming up. Democrats in the House passed the HEROES Act 2 months ago, 2.5 months ago. Instead of coming up with a single comprehensive bill, divisions within their own party forced Republicans to release several separate bills. With all their infighting, they can't even agree on one bill. They can't even get 51 votes for anything that's comprehensive, that deals with the very real problems the American people face, paying the rent, putting food on the table. And when Republicans released their proposal, it was like Christmas in July for defense contractors, wealthy CEOs, and the Trump Organization. It's as if their lobbyists were allowed to write the bill and give their fat cat clients a lot of their dream presents. Just look what's in and what's left out of their plan. In, tax deductions for 3 martini lunches, $20 billion slush fund for large agribusiness, corporate immunity, billions for defense contractors, and $2 billion for an FBI headquarters that helps the Trump Hotel. Those all made it in. Out, help for state and local governments, nutrition assistance for families, rental or mortgage assistance to keep people from losing their homes. Not in the Republican plan. It was very summed up what New Yorkers and Americans think in one of my hometown papers. This is the Daily News, picture of Mitch McConnell. Let them eat cake. Let them eat cake. So, people can't feed their kids, people are losing their homes, they get kicked out from their apartments, small business going under, and the Republican response, let them eat cake. I have a suggestion to Mitch McConnell. Instead of blaming Democrats and calling our plan a socialist manifesto, how about Senate Republicans and Leader McConnell get their act together, roll up their sleeves, and actually get to real work and help us solve these problems? We want to get something done. We see the urgency of this crisis, of so many small business people who struggled for years losing their businesses, of hardworking people being thrown off the job through no fault of their own, of people who can't feed their kids, people who might get evicted from their homes, and so much more. We want to get something done. Americans cannot afford any more of this hard right Republican ideology. We're going to keep negotiating. Meeting today with Speaker Pelosi, Secretary Mnuchin, and Mr. Meadows. McConnell doesn't want to be at these meetings, I guess, because his caucus is so divided, but we're going to meet and continue to work. Senator Stabenow.
Thank you, Senator Schumer. Since the COVID-19 pandemic hit our nation, hunger has been on the rise for millions of Americans. There's the 85-year-old senior citizen who's isolated in her apartment right now, which is difficult enough, who's being forced to choose between buying her food and getting her medicine. And right now, for her and millions of seniors who are on SNAP, they receive the minimum benefit, which is $16 a month. Not a day, a month. The House HEROES Act would raise that minimum to $60 a month, which we strongly support. Then there's a laid-off worker sitting in a food bank line for hours who never before in his life thought he would have to ask for help, and there he is, waiting for some groceries. There's a single mom with 2 kids who's skipping meals herself to make sure her kids aren't going to bed at night hungry. That's a reality every day in America. In fact, right now, 1 out of 6 households with children don't have enough to eat. The average person on SNAP receives $127 a month. It's about $1.40 per meal, $1.40. The 15% increase we're requesting is less than an additional $1 per day per person. That's what they're objecting to right now. At this point, it's clear we're not only facing a public health crisis, we're not only facing an economic crisis, we are facing a hunger crisis in America. However, you wouldn't know it by looking at the Senate Republican proposal. After months of delay, the Republican plan is stunningly silent on food assistance for families. It also fails to address the challenges schools are facing to feed children in the fall as they are trying to figure out what's going to happen in terms of going back to school. It's also really important to stress that for every $1 of SNAP benefits, you can return $1.70 to the economy. The most efficient way to help people buy food is to give them money to go to the grocery store, and every dollar they buy in food goes to the grocery store, to the processor, and the farmer. Boosting SNAP benefits is a tried and true way to strengthen the economy and help laid-off workers, veterans, seniors, families with young children put food on their table. Senate Republicans might be able to ignore the hunger crisis in our country, but right now, there are too many Americans who can't ignore the pain of an empty stomach. The Republican agricultural proposal is a non-starter unless it boosts food help for our families.
Thank you. Senator Stabenow has a prior engagement,
Thank
so
you.
she's going to get going. Senator Wyden.
Thank you, Senator Schumer, and particularly for doing this in such a timely way, since the Finance Committee has been looking at the Republican proposal, and if I could sum it up in a sentence, the Republican proposal is a textbook case of total indifference to human suffering. And with respect to the unemployment issue, which of course has been a lifeline for millions of Americans, the Americans who walk this economic tightrope, always trying to balance the rent bill against the grocery bill, and the grocery bill against the cost of their medicine. Here's the reality those people face. Say you were a server in a restaurant that for years had done pretty well. You got laid off. But then the restaurant said, you know, we're going to try to make it. And you got called back to work, but you got laid off a second time when virus cases exploded. And your restaurant said, we're closing for good. And you're seeing small business after small business across America closing their doors for good. So this Republican argument that all these workers, they just don't want to work, and of course it's essentially against the rules to turn down a job if you're physically capable of doing the work. The fact is, this is not about the workers, because as Senator Brown talks about, the workers have a tremendous work ethic. They believe deeply in the dignity of work. This is not about them. It's about the scarcity of jobs. Now, I want to just take a minute to tell you how this plan unfolds. The Republican plan, in all its cruelty, slashes the benefit. We call them the supercharged benefits. They slash them from 600 to 200. That happens overnight, but then it actually gets worse. By October, states would be required to calculate the supplement on an individual basis, to ensure that no one gets more than 70% of their prior wages through unemployment. That is what Eugene Scalia, the Secretary of Labor, said in the finance room for days on end was unworkable. He said it was unworkable. And in fact, the reason that we went to $600 more per week is he said it was unworkable. He folded his arms. It was clear he didn't want to do anything for workers. And I said, fine, you're not going to tell those workers to go pound sand. We're going to settle for an average, which is what we did. And Senator Schumer and I and others, that was our position. We held to it strongly. And I think it's fair to say, and I feel, having been involved in public service, one of the most important things I've ever been involved with, because I think it's kept the economy afloat. And for millions of people, they wouldn't have been able to feed their kids, and they could have well been on the street. So after October, it actually gets worse. States would have 2 months to redo their entire system. If they can't do it in 2 months, which they tell us they won't be able to do, they can request a waiver from the Department of Labor. Even if they get the waiver, they'll have just 2 more months to redo their systems. Now, let's say that there's a miracle and states can come up with a brand new system by December. If they get to that point, they have pulled off this Herculean task, that it will be just in time for the federal boost to expire altogether. And that is why a Republican administrator in Georgia who actually runs these programs described, this is not Senator Schumer or I, this is a Republican administrator, and I'll just quote him here, calling it the dumbest idea ever. That is a Republican administrator's characterization of this cruel, heartless, unworkable proposal. We've made it clear for weeks and weeks that we were ready to negotiate on this issue. And I'll tell you, my own sense is that Mitch McConnell never had any interest, none, in preventing a lapse in benefits that these workers depend on. And I'm just very pleased that we've made it clear that we're going to hang in there for these families and workers. We aren't going to turn our back on them. We understand that so many of them are people who are laid off. They thought maybe there was a shot for a future. They were brought back. They've been laid off again, and this is happening from sea to shining sea. So thank you, Senator Schumer.
Senator Brown.
Thank you. I know my friends on the other side of the aisle don't get out a lot, don't really listen to the suffering, don't feel the suffering that so many Americans and the anxiety they face. One of my favorite Abraham Lincoln quotes, he said, "I have to get out of the White House and get my public opinion bath." And it's pretty clear that Senator McConnell and the leaders on their side aren't getting many public opinion baths. They've not really thought about the anxiety. Think about a worker in Albany, or a worker in Eugene, Oregon, or a worker in Mansfield, Ohio, who gets laid off. She doesn't pay a lot of attention to what's going on in Congress, but she does know that her unemployment's going to run out. The $600 a week, which is, as Senator Wyden said, kept her afloat, kept her able to pay her rent, kept her able to feed her kids, kept her able to do just the things she needs to do to get along in life. She knows that's about to run out. And if you think about this perfect storm, so unemployment's about to run out. The moratoria on evictions around the country is about to expire. And eviction courts all over the country, as courthouses open up, eviction courts are opening. So if you follow the Republican logic, $600 a week becomes $200 a week. Think of the anxiety for these families that just simply don't know what they're going to do to feed their kids, what they're going to do to be able to make their rent payment. That's why it's so important that we act. The Republican plan has no assistance for renters or homeowners that will help people pay those bills. It has no extension of the eviction moratorium, and it has a reduction from $600 to $200 in unemployment insurance. What are people going to do? It's clear what they're going to do. They're going to be forced to choose between their utility bills and rent, between food and prescriptions. They're going to turn to payday lenders. At the same time, the corporate sponsors of the Consumer Bureau's Kathy Kraninger, the director of the Consumer Bureau, at the same time she's weakening tough rules about payday lenders, they're going to lose their homes. It's pretty simple. And we have a choice to make. This Republican plan has turned a public health crisis into an economic crisis, into a housing crisis. And we simply can't let them do that. If you love your country, you fight for the people who make it work. And the people who make it work need unemployment if they can't find jobs. They need rental assistance if they can't afford their rent. And they need an expansion of food stamp benefits if they when they simply can't do it any other way. That's the importance about what we're about to do.
I had two more things just hearing what Leader McConnell had said. First, he said his liability plan is not for business. In the sheet, the white paper sheet they gave out, it mentions business 10 times. And second, they said they want to help working families. Well, it's not a way to help working families to cut their benefits. So once again, I want to hold this nice thing up. Let them eat cake. That is the Republican plan. Let them eat cake. Questions? Yes.
I have two. Today, Leader Hoyer seemed to suggest that $600 was a negotiable amount of money. And I'm just wondering where you and Speaker Pelosi stand.
We don't believe that. I don't know what Speaker Hoyer said, but $600 we believe in the Heroes Bill, extend it till January 31st. That $600 has kept millions of people out of poverty, millions of people in their homes, millions of people feeding their families, and it, along with PPP, is the number one reason the economy is beginning to creep back up, because consumer spending is going up, and that's because of money in people's pockets. We believe we keep it.
Congressman John Lewis, if the Democrats were to recapture the majority in the Senate, would it be a priority to restore the Voting Rights Act?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's one of our highest priorities. It's in H.R. 1. What they did in the Shelby case, what the Supreme Court, including Justice Roberts, did in the Shelby case was despicable. They undid the preclearance, the federal government's ability to stop states, localities from preventing people of color, poor people from voting. And Roberts said something to the effect, well, there's no more bigotry, we don't need this anymore, and then 19 states changed their laws and made them much worse for people to vote.
Senator, can you talk about how seriously you see the Republican opposition to the Republican proposal?
There's a lot of Republican opposition. It's estimated not just by Lindsey Graham, but by Blunt and one other, who said they don't think half their caucus would vote for any more funding. Now, they're in Never Never Land. Their view is let the private sector do everything. The private sector can't solve the health crisis. The private sector can't solve the economic crisis. You need the government to act. But Republicans' ideology is tying them in a straitjacket so they can't move, and it's hurting America badly.
One thing they're united on, though, is their disdain for unemployment insurance. It's pretty clear. We had
Yes.
one amendment on the CARES Act when it passed back in March. One amendment was allowed on the Senate floor. That is to strip away the provisions that Senator Wyden wrote on the $600 unemployment insurance. So it's clear they're hostile to helping workers.
Let me just follow that up real quickly. After we got this passed, Eugene Scalia, the Labor Secretary, made one appearance. He went over to Fox Business and said the big challenge with this unemployment insurance bill was not some of the outdated technology, was that workers were too dependent on government. So what Senator Brown is talking about, this is a time-honored Republican principle, blame the worker.
Understood.
Yes. But you do have a follow-up?
I do have a follow-up. What I'm asking really is this, if Senator McConnell has a large block of his own caucus saying that $1 trillion is too much, does that potentially pose a challenge for you when it gets down to negotiations?
Well, look, you know, the past three bills, the Republicans have said they want to do much less than needed. We held firm, and they moved in our direction because the times demand it, the people demand it. And so if we stay strong, I have a good hope, a realistic chance that Republicans, a decent chance that Republicans will move in our direction and will get much of what we want. Because the choice of doing nothing is just appalling. And while they talk about it, I don't know if they can actually look it in the face.
The GOP bill doesn't seem to include any funding for elections. Will you insist on the full?
It's
3.6
one of our
billion?
most important provisions to get all 3.6 billion. COVID has made it harder to vote. Voting is a sacred right. We Democrats are going to defend that right with everything we have. Thank you, everybody.